Alright, so in this lesson we're going to take an introductory look at cameras. Now this is not going to cover every single thing that you can possibly do with cameras, but it's going to get you familiar enough with them so that you can start to use them in your own animated sequences. Before I begin though, let me go ahead and build sort of a scene that we can use for this lesson. I'll start off with a plane. There's a nice, strange, brown mustard colored plane.
Very ugly.
That's okay, we'll get over it. Let's go ahead and make a few boxes that'll work, I guess, kind of like buildings.
Yeah, like buildings.
Yeah. And I'll make just one more kind of smaller one up here in front. So that'll work. This will be the scene that we use to actually test and see what our cameras are up to. So under the Create panel, I'm going to go under Cameras, and we're going to see that cameras come in two different flavors. We have Target and Free. So there's just a slight difference in between the two, but we can toggle back and forth depending on which one we want after we create it. So what I'm going to do is create a target camera, and then I'll just change it over to a free later on, and you'll see the difference between the two. So I'll bring in a target camera, and essentially what makes this a target camera as opposed to a free camera is that it has this little dummy object, this target, if you will. And what we can do is move this dummy around, and if you look up here inside of our top view, or front view, top of the screen, front view, as we move this around, our camera actually rotates itself. So it always remains looking at this target no matter what. On the other hand, if we were to create a free camera, I know I said I wasn't going to build one, but you know how that goes. We'll go ahead and just bring in a free camera. It does not have this target. So if we need this camera to rotate around, we're going to have to manually use our rotation tools and aim it where we need it to be. So for now, we're just going to use a target camera, but that is really the only difference in between the two. So let me select this camera, and we'll go under its Modify list, and let's have a look at some of its parameters. Also, what I want to do is look through this camera, and there's two major ways to do that. One is we can just choose a viewport and hit the C key, and that'll just automatically shoot right to our camera. It'll cycle through cameras also if you have multiple cameras in the scene. But we can also right-click down here, over here in the text where it says left in this particular case, and under Views we can choose Camera 1 at the top. Now there are a couple other ways to get to it, but these are the two important ones we're going to use right now. Also, let me go ahead and move the camera around a bit, and you'll notice that the target stays stationary, so in effect I'm just kind of adjusting where the camera is looking from sort of a different angle, if you will.
Right.
And we'll come over here to this camera view, and I'll shade it up so that we can see it. And let's have a look at some of the parameters that are within this camera. First of all, we have field of view and lens thickness. Now, this is in millimeters, so what I really want to get across is that these two are tied together. So the thicker our lens is, the lower our field of view, and vice versa. Now, if you're not quite familiar with photography and how light refracts through lenses, you can just use the stock lenses that are here, and these will work just like their real-world counterparts. So you can use a 35mm lens, a 50mm lens. You can also just adjust your field of view, and the lens thickness will update accordingly. You don't really have to worry about it so much, other than maybe you just know you need a certain degree of field of view. You don't have to worry about the lens thickness. But if you know that you want to be able to look through, say, an 80mm lens for whatever, you can just type in 80 up here inside the spinner, and that's the type of effect that you would actually get. Now, field of view is calculated in three different ways. One is horizontally, which is how it's calculated now. Another is vertically, and the last is diagonally. And you can switch through those here in this flyout menu, but these don't really change anything. All it is the way field of view is calculated. So it's not going to be really any kind of drastic change as far as how things look. So let me go on back to a 35mm lens for now, so we have a relatively normal look. Also, down underneath this, we have orthographic projection. If we activate this, you'll notice up here that our camera becomes orthographic.
In other words, no depth.
No depth, just like our front view or top view, side view if we had them all open right now, or left view if you will. And I already demonstrated the stock lenses. These are going to change the lens thickness and field of view according to the type of lens that you choose. Right now we'll just stick with 35mm for this example. And then here we have the type of camera that we have created. We can change this over to a free camera or a target camera. just kind of a quick note that'll possibly speed your processes along. It might be easier to always create a target camera so that you can get that click-drag action to aim the camera at any specific object, and then if you don't need that target anymore, you can just switch it back to a free camera. So we'll switch it back to a target, and just kind of a quick bonus, because it's kind of cool. If you switch it to a free camera and switch it back to a target, you'll notice the dummy will always come in a different color if you have assigned random colors on. So just one of those really cool things you can sit here and toggle until you get a color that you like.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yes. Very important that we know about that. Anyway, so we also have show cone. Now, right now, the cone is showing, and you'll notice whether we have this activated or deactivated, the cone is visible. What this really has to do with is when your camera is deselected. So if I deselect my camera right now, you'll notice the cone disappears. So if I select my camera and I activate show cone, then deselect my camera, the cone is always visible. This can be really handy if you need to know whether an object is going to be within the field of view of the camera without having to actually switch to that camera. So it's a very cool setting to have. Also, we have show horizon. Now you'll notice over here inside of our camera view, we now have a black line at the far range of the camera. This is essentially the horizon line.
Right.
This is where lines of depth would converge to a single point in the distance, if you will. So we'll go ahead and switch that off, but it's very handy if you've been banking the camera, you need to kind of stabilize yourself, figure out where you are exactly. You've got this horizon line to help you out. Next we have environment ranges. And what these are really going to do is control how fog thickness is going to behave. Let me go ahead and demonstrate this in a quick way. Under rendering, I'm going to activate environments. Now, this is not a lecture about environments. This is just to show off this one little parameter. Let me go ahead and click add, and I'm going to add a fog into the scene. And then we'll just close that. So our fog is already here. So if I select camera 1 and I render out, we're going to see that we have some fog going on. This cube here in the back is starting to kind of fade out. It's getting a little bit faded. But here, check this out. Let's take our environment ranges, and I'll show these. And what we're awarded with, if you will, are a couple of planes that we can adjust the distance on. We have a near range, and we have a far range. Now what these are going to be is, these are going to allow you to control how your fog goes to complete opacity, or full thickness where you can't see to it. So let me demonstrate just really quick. What I'm going to do is take my far range, and I'm going to pull it forward so that it completely blocks off this back building back here. Then I'll take my near range, and we'll just slide it up to about the edge of our plane. And now let me render this out. And you'll notice that the back building is completely hidden now.
So basically, the near range is where the fog starts, and the far range is where it ends, or where it becomes completely opaque and you can't see anything.
Exactly. Beyond the far range, there might as well be nothing.
Right.
So, just a quick thing there. And I'm not really going to, like I said, I'm not going to get too heavy into environments. I just wanted to show how that actually works. So if you need to hide various objects in the scene inside of a fog, this allows you to control how thick your fog is getting. So what I'm going to actually do now is take my fog and delete it from my scene. Down beneath this, we have our clipping planes. Now, what these are going to do is essentially control what is visible and what is not visible to the camera. Now, these work for the viewport and for the render, so be aware of that. And here's just kind of an idea of how these work. If I activate clip manually, just like with our environment ranges, we have these two planes that we can adjust. So here's our near clipping plane, and here's our far clipping plane, which I've got to bring in from the background. And if you're paying attention, some crazy stuff just happened up here in the camera view. Let me go back and show you what just happened. As I take my near clipping plane and push it out from the camera, you can see it here kind of moving away from the camera. As it passes through objects, you'll notice up here in our upper left viewport for camera 1 that objects are disappearing. In fact, they're being cut away as if a plane were slicing right through them.
That's kind of a cool effect.
Absolutely. What's actually going on here is that this plane is designating what is actually visible in the scene. So anything in front of the near clipping plane will not be visible, even if it's just part of an object, as we can see here. In fact, let me kind of drive this point home, if you will. What I'm going to do is come in here in my perspective view, and let's create a teapot. Good old teapot.
Teapots are cool.
And let's just go ahead. I'll switch on auto grid. And I'll create this right here on top of this box so I can see it very easily. Let's get our move tool out, and I'll bring this a little closer to the camera. And let me rotate it so that we're kind of looking at it side on here inside of the camera itself. And let's slide it over to the middle of the screen. Now what I want to do is select this camera again, and let's take a closer look at our clipping plane and exactly what it's doing for maybe those out there who might be a little bit confused. If you watch up here inside of the camera's view, as the clipping plane comes out of the camera and begins to pass through the teapot is cut away. Now, just as a bit of a treat, you can use this to actually show cutaways of certain objects. So let's take our teapot, for example, and don't worry too much about what I'm doing. I'm just going to take a material, and let's give it some sort of a pale blue color, maybe. And I'll go ahead and assign this to the teapot, and I'm going to make this a two-sided material. So now we can actually see the inside of the teapot, because as you might know, Max will not allow you to see the back faces of polygons inside the viewport, so we do have to make this two-sided. Now the great thing about the clipping planes are that they also control the render as well as the viewport. So let me grab my clipping plane and pull it back just for a moment. Bring it back toward the camera so it's looking relatively normal. And we'll hit render. Let's render the proper viewport. And there we go. So we can see our teapot very clearly here in front. Now I'm going to push this out about halfway out and re-render. And we do have this bit of a clip. Now let's just say in this example that all we wanted to see is the teapot itself. We don't want to see all of this mess behind. Well, we can now take our far clipping plane and bring it backward so that it doesn't include. And you'll notice in the viewport, as I bring this back, if you look over here, our objects in the distance are essentially hidden. It looks like they kind of get erased in a wave.
Yeah, they do.
And then if we re-render, again, the camera 1 viewport, there we go. We now only see what is within our two clipping planes, what is actually in front, what is behind the near plane and in front of the far plane. Now, down from here we have multipass effects where we have depth of field and motion blur. I'm not going to talk about these right now. This is an introductory lesson, as I mentioned. And we have a target distance, which is going to determine how far away our target is. If you look, our little target dummy object is kind of shooting back and forth as I use this. So really, with that, there's only one more thing I want to demonstrate, and that is if we come up here to the camera's view, we're going to notice that our navigation controls down here in the corner have changed a little bit. They're a little different than, say, if I go into the perspective view. If you look at them now, we have our standard zoom extents, field of view, and whatnot. But if I come over here, some of these change. And let's take a look at exactly how they've changed. First of all, we have dolly camera. So if I activate this and drag here inside of my camera 1 view, you'll notice in perspective what's happening is my camera is essentially getting closer and further away from my target. In fact, if I dolly out past my target, the camera will flip around. This is also a flyout, however, and if I hold down the mouse button and go up to the next setting on it, this is going to allow me to dolly just my target. So, as I drag in and out, you'll notice my target and my entire cone are extending. So you'll see that down here. Doesn't really do too much to the camera, but if you were using field of view with the target distance, then this would change how your field of view is in focus. Just sort of as a note, field of view is an effect on a camera where a certain object is in focus.
Oh, you mean depth of field?
What did I meant depth of field.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Zach just had a minor brain hemorrhage.
It's all good.
It's all good. Depth of field, field of view. Depth of field, thank you, is a camera operation where a specific object is in focus and any object that is in front of that object or behind it is out of focus.
Right.
So if you're using a depth of field effect by controlling your target distance, this is how you could adjust where your target is. Sorry about that quick mix-up.
It's all good.
And we'll also come up here and take a look at our last option, which is selecting both the camera and the target simultaneously. So we'll go ahead and drag back and forth, and you'll notice that now we're just flying the entire camera forward. By the way, this is exactly like dollying the camera if you had a free camera and not a target. So just flies the whole contraption forward. Alright, so next from here we have perspective. Now this is going to be a little tricky, so watch down here inside the perspective view. As I move this in and out, what this is doing is adjusting my field of view by moving the camera and leaving the target stationary. So actually, if I come up here to the top where we see field of view, and I drag up here, you'll notice my field of view is changing. So the angle of my cone is changing, but the end of the angle and the target is remaining stationary. Only the camera itself is moving. Next to this, we have roll camera, which essentially is going to be like banking to the left and right. It's also a real good reason to have your horizon visible, so that you can level things back out if you need to. There we go. Down from that, we have zoom extents for all selected objects, or just normal zoom extents for a specific object, and so on. We have field of view, which we can adjust as we need to. You'll notice the cone getting smaller and larger. We have pan, which works just like pan and inside of a normal camera. We have a couple of other options here that are a little bit different. I'm sorry, this was not pan, this is truck camera.
Right.
It's called pan in the other camera, and so I get a little bit confused. But anyway, no, this is trucking the camera. It works just like pan inside of perspective. Panning with this actual camera will just kind of turn the thing as if it were attached to your head, like kind of how you turn
like
your
when you play a first-person shooter.
Kind of like when you play a first-person shooter, but for those out there who aren't video game inclined, it's just like how you rotate your head around on your neck. Like if I look to the left, if I look to the right, look up, look down, and so on. So if I hold this down, I have a flyout, and I have orbit camera, which will tumble my camera around my target. So my target remains stationary, and you can see my camera rolling around it. And then finally at the very end, we have min-max toggle, which will minimize and maximize our viewport. And really, though, with that, that's all that I want to talk about with cameras. It covers a lot of different stuff, and you can animate these parameters. You can animate a camera just like you do an object, flying through a scene if you need to. You can take, just as a tip, you can come in here, like say in any viewport really, and let me just come in here and grab the zoom tool for example, and we could select our target, and we could link that to an object and use it as a way for our camera to always track that object. So, as an example, let me grab my target over here, I'll get the link tool out, and if I link this up to this teapot, I can now take the teapot and move it around, and my camera will always follow the teapot. So if you've got an animation where your camera needs to follow a specific object, that is definitely one way to do it. So with that, I think the lesson is pretty much wrapped up, so thanks a lot, everyone.